I'm Father Stephen Riley here in Salamanca with the backdrop of the historical Irish College. Today I'd like to talk about the reality of sin. Sin is something which affects all of us and in which we all participate. The scriptures tell us lots about sin. They tell us about sin and particularly so that we can avoid it. They try to diagnose it in the different books of the Bible, and always the backdrop is forgiveness, the forgiveness offered by God and won for us by Jesus Christ on the cross. The reality of sin is first presented to us in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis. In the 1st and 2nd chapters, we hear about the creation of the world, and God has created a universe, a creation, a cosmos in which everything is in harmony, and humans are in harmony with God, with nature, and with each other. And the 3rd chapter of Genesis is the unfortunate story of how that harmony is broken. Let's look at it step by step. The serpent comes along and speaks to the woman. A serpent in the time of Genesis, when it was written and the audience it was written for, would not have understood it as being a reference to the devil. That's something which comes in later theology and later reflection, especially under the influence of St. Augustine. A serpent is first of all a sign of danger. As you can imagine, a serpent is something which can come along and can bite us, can kill us, before we even notice that it has become present. It's also a symbol of unfaithfulness of God's people. People who had moved away from the worship of the God of Israel often returned to the worship of the Canaanite gods, and one of the Canaanite gods was represented as a serpent. So therefore it also represents the danger of unfaithfulness of the people of God. So this serpent comes along and speaks to the woman and says, "Did God really say that you are not allowed to eat the fruit of any of the trees in the garden?" We know that God has in fact said the opposite of that. The man and woman are able to eat of all of the trees in the garden apart from one. God is saying there is one tree which you can't touch. Please just trust me, it's not good for you, it's not healthy. And in a broader sense, to understand that there is something that we can't have, and if we understand our limitations, then therefore we'll be happy. But the woman is a little confused and rocked back at her heels, if you like, because the serpent has expressed the complete opposite what God has said. And so the woman says, no, God did not say that we could not eat of any of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God did say that we are not allowed to eat of the fruit in the middle of the garden, nor to touch it under pain of death. And if you look back at the 1st and 2nd chapter of Genesis, the tree to which the serpent refers, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is not the one in the centre of the garden. That rather is the tree of life. And yet the woman has looked at that tree and suddenly it has become the centre of her attention. The thing she can't have is the thing that she wants the most. That's something I'm sure that we too would understand and would recognise. And also, the prohibition of God has become a taboo. It's something which is no longer understood. It doesn't make sense. We're not allowed to touch it. It's almost like we're not allowed to look at it or we will die. Whereas God didn't say anything about that at all. God just wishes to prevent the man and woman from falling into selfishness, and God wants to protect them. But now that the tree is at the very centre of the garden, and now that the serpent ironically promises that the man and woman's eyes will be opened, the woman desires that fruit. So she takes some of the fruit and she eats it and she gives it to her husband. As a matter of interest, there is no apple which is mentioned, it's just a generic fruit. They eat the fruit together and their eyes are opened and they see that they are naked, and so they go and hide. And God comes along to walk with them in the cool of the evening in the garden and find that they are no longer there, they are hiding. God said, "Where are you?" And the man says, "We are hiding." And God says, "Oh, what has happened? Why are you hiding?" Because in the first 2 chapters there was nothing to hide. And in fact the nakedness, which is a gift to the man and the woman, is a symbol of nothing to hide from each other or from God, no secrets. And so now realising that they are naked and covering themselves up is a sign of shame in which they feel a nakedness. And so, in terms of the structure of sin which is being presented to us in the book of Genesis, not just the first sin chronologically, but how all sin goes, we see how it goes, what happens. First of all, they hide the sin, just as Cain and Abel. When Cain kills Abel, he will try and hide the body of Abel in order not to be caught. So we tend to hide what we've done to cover it up. And when we can't cover up any longer, we see what happens next. God, when asking what has happened, gets this answer from the man. The woman that you gave me made me do it. And so the man gives the blame to the woman and indeed to God. The woman that you gave me made me do it. And then God says, is that right? Have you done this? Asks the woman, and the woman says, it was the snake who'd made me do it. And by that time the snake has left the scene and can't defend itself. So we tend to blame and to pass down the line, if you like. We wouldn't say that the woman is weaker, but yet the man spots a weakness. And if you like, it's the first expression of sexism. Blame it on who seems the weaker partner, and the woman does so down the chain, down in order to get to the snake who can't defend himself. The punishments which God gives are ones which may seem harsh, especially if we don't understand what the original sin was. This selfishness, a desire to possess everything, and yet they're very proportionate. Because what was the sin? It was about wishing to possess everything, not to allow something to exist which does not belong to me. And in fact, that's underlined in the symbolism of what is eaten. The man and the woman eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Eating is a positive thing, but it's also a negative and destructive thing. If you think about it, if we are going to destroy something, the most efficient way to do it is to eat it. It's entirely destroyed, and it's destroyed in order to be assimilated into ourselves. And therefore, if you like, the eating of food is a selfish act. Also, the idea of the knowledge of good and evil that they eat is what's called a merism in the Old Testament. It means two opposite things which stand for everything. Like in the Psalms where it says, from the rising of the sun to its setting, great is the name of the Lord. And that means simply that God is always great. And so two opposites, the knowledge of good and evil, means everything. And so the man and woman are taking everything, they are destroying it in order to possess it and to make it part of themselves. And so sin is about selfishness, and that continues, of course, to this day. As I say, the punishments which God gives to the man and the woman are proportionate. First of all, he asks them to leave the garden, he expels them. But in reality, the garden as paradise no longer exists. It's now a place of shame, it's now a place of blame and recrimination. And therefore, you might say that it no longer exists and they leave voluntarily. The punishment of the man is that he will grow crops, but he will do so with the sweat of his brow, and it will be difficult for him. For the woman, the punishment is that she will have pain in childbirth. And for the snake is that the snake will crawl on its belly and eat dust. What are those punishments all about? Well, for the snake, it's an attempt to understand, why do snakes not have legs? Why are things the way they are? Maybe it's because of some punishment for some initial crime. But the punishments of man and woman are directly linked to what they've done. Think about it, when are the times when man and woman would feel most creative? When they are producing something, producing crops, producing children. And at that moment, it's a time when they would be most tempted to think that they are God. But only God has the potential to be God, to possess everything, but able to share. And so, just at the moment when they are most tempted to feel like God, they will be reminded through the pain and the suffering that they are not God, and that everything they have comes from God as a gift, and therefore it has to be shared.